Okay, we're going to take a minute to review yesterday's material on plans, sections, and elevations. So apologies for the redundancy, but hopefully this will just help this sink in a little bit more. So in the upper left, you have an elevation. Does anyone want to just describe for me what an elevation is? What does it show us? Okay,
It
Matthew?
seems to show like the kind of like the front of the building, just like the height level, but like doesn't go like inside or like the length.
Yeah, exactly. It's an image of the front or one facade, one face of the building. And it could be the front elevation, it could be a side, the back of the building, another side of the building, but just like you said, we're always just looking at it from the outside. Here in this elevation, you can see a series of columns. We've got a colonnade there. You can imagine walking up to that building and you have an idea about sort of where your body could go as you walked through it or walked up to it. Okay, good. What about a section? Meredith?
So I kind of think of it as like the inner workings of the building. Like if you would, like when they showed the cake in that last PowerPoint, like if you would cut it in half and like what goes into like the insides of it or like holding it up, I guess.
Yeah, perfect. Great job. So it's as if we took this, the building that's in the elevation up here. I'm pointing and you guys aren't seeing it. In this elevation, we're looking at that building. We're slicing it down the middle, and then we're opening it up kind of like a dollhouse where you can see the inside of the building. And then we're looking at one particular half head on once again. So we can see in this image, we've got, a theater stage. There's the curtain for the theater. Here's the stage itself. All of the inner workings of that building as if we just cut it right in half. Okay, and then over on the right, we have two plans. Someone tell me what we're looking at in those plans. Let's see, Sophie?
Yes, so the plans are kind of like what I think of as an overhead view that kind of shows the entire building and like what they're planning to do like in the building itself. So you're just looking at the top and it shows all four like sides so you can see like the streets and which way everything is facing.
Yeah, great. So we've taken that theater building, taken everything off except that ground floor layer. It's like we're looking at it from the top down without the roof, without the upper stories. We can see all the seating where the people are going to sit to view the stage. We can see some of the side rooms, restrooms, green rooms, things like that you would find in a theater. Okay, good. Any questions on this? We'll work it over and over and over again, so don't worry. Right now, do you guys have something in front of you you can write or draw with? You can use a mouse and a blank screen if you want. Take a second to get something to do that. Okay, so if you will please draw a plan, a section, and an elevation of an orange. Okay, if you will hold up your drawing, tell me what you got. Oh, good, we've got some tiny ones, okay? Stick them right up on the screen, if you will. That will help me a lot.
Should I just share my screen if I did it on my computer?
Awesome. Yeah, if you can. I don't know if it'll let you since I'm sharing a PowerPoint. Instead, would you just describe to me what you've got?
So for the elevation, when I'm looking straight at it, I kind of just do a circle and then like, I guess like the little part with the pit, I would
nice
say.
detail. Yep.
And
good.
then for the section, I basically drew exactly what was next to the other orange. And then from the plan, I try to just draw like a smaller circle with then like a little inner circle to describe the pit.
Nice. Okay, great. So anybody else have anything different than that? Okay, this one is both simple and tricky at the same time. This is definitely what a plan would look like, right? You're just looking at the orange from the very top down. If you're just getting like a plan is in some ways the footprint of the building in question. What is the outline of it? What are the basic components? Now, if we had rooms within the orange, then you'd see the dividers for the walls and things, okay? Then, as you said, the elevation, It's really just another circle. You can add the detail of that little stem bit at the top. And the section, we've already provided that in the image. So any questions on this? And don't hesitate to ask. Okay, great. So now we will move into our case studies for today. First, Teotihuacan, which is an outstanding place. If you ever have the opportunity to go to Mexico City, don't miss taking a day trip out here. You can get on a bus, public bus. It's about a 45-minute ride. It's an interesting cultural experience, just going through the countryside. Go early in the morning because there will be monster loads of tourists if you wait even an hour after the park is open. But it's a spectacular site and something easy to get to from North America. Not right now, but in other times. Okay, so in this image, you can see what's happening around 600 CE, which is when the first encounters with Teotihuacan are occurring. There's a lot going on throughout the Americas, several different cultures, the Maya, the Zapotec, the Nazca, the Mochi, all sorts of peoples have populated these two continents. And you can see their empires sort of in those large amorphous shapes. That's just to give you an idea of context. Now we'll move into the site itself. First, tell me something interesting you learned from the readings, podcast, video about Teotihuacan. Yeah, Jack.
Yeah, one thing that I thought was interesting was like the story about how the sun and the moon became the way that they are and how like sacrifices were necessary and blood was demanded for the sun to rise. It doesn't have much to do with like the structure themselves, but
right.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gives you an idea of what was going on in the minds of the people who made it, what they were building, who they were building to honor, and what these sites would become. Good. Can anyone elaborate on that sun and moon story a little bit?
Wait, I didn't. Sorry, my microphone cut out. What'd you say?
You're fine, and it wasn't all on you. I'm asking anybody
okay.
but I'll be happy for you to answer. If you could elaborate, anyone, on that story of the sun and the moon a little bit. Who were they?
It was like one. I'm gonna get kind of butcher this, but it was like one guy that was really like noble, volunteered to become the sun, and then he backed out of it, and then this other guy that was like kind of weaker decided to become the sun, and he jumped into like lava or a fire to become the sun, and then the noble guy was like, oh, that's super easy, like I can do it, and so he jumped into the fire and became the moon.
Right, nice. Right, so something we learned from the story about the culture itself, there's some prizing of not just like the boisterous, loud leader, but the one who's really constant, humble, and willing to do the work, right? There's this interesting juxtaposition between those two. And then the rise of that maybe quieter, more withdrawn figure to become the real leader of these people and of the site itself. Great. So modern archaeologists don't know what this site was originally called. The name Teotihuacan comes from Nahuatl language. Nahuatl is another word for the Aztec. It's the name that those people called themselves. The Spanish called them the Aztec, but they were the Nahua or Nahuatl people. And the name Teotihuacan is thought to mean the place of the gods. And you can see that in this monumental architecture. Around the time of the Spanish conquest in about 1519, the Mexica had already built, the Nahuatl and the Mexica had already built much of what we see as Teotihuacan today. It was known as a great city. It began as a ritual and ceremonial center, and it expanded to be a marketplace, a city, and what it's best and most famously known for are a series of architectural features that we'll begin to investigate today. This site was at its peak, it was most famous for being the heart of the Triple Alliance, which just in short, was the height of that Aztec or Nahuatl Empire when they partnered with the Texcoco people nearby and the Mexica to form a real powerhouse in this Central Valley of Mexico. Okay. At the zenith of this site, there was perhaps 125,000 people living there. At its time, it was certainly the largest city in the Americas and one of the largest cities in the world at its time. We're talking about 550 in the Common Era. So that would be also known as AD. The city spread out roughly 8 miles, and it held 80 to 90% of the population of Mexico's Central Valley. So it really was a major thriving metropolis. When we see these images today, you can see a few tourists scattered through this image, but this was a densely packed city with agriculture, with artisans, with a priestly class, and then a ruling class all living there. Super vibrant. Artistically novel and inspiring. One of the key features of this site are the murals that are still there, that are super well preserved because they have been inside these stone-covered pyramids themselves, or inside the palaces actually that are built nearby the main temples and sites. Okay. What are we looking at here?
This is the plan of Teotihuacan.
Yeah, exactly. So different from a plan of a home or an individual building, we might call this a city plan or the site plan for the city, but you're right on. It's great. The unique thing about the city plan for Teotihuacan is its structure. Just looking at it, can anyone guess of what's structurally significant about this? Or what, when you look at it, what's one of the major identifying features?
It's on a grid system.
Yeah, okay, perfect.
And I remember from the reading, it goes north to south, and then it's built on the east and west sides of the main road.
Excellent, excellent. So it's built in what we call along an axial plan. And that main Avenue of the Dead forms that axis. It's the avenue around which everything is organized. And just as you said, Matthew, we have a roughly gridded structure that branches out on the east and west sides of that Avenue of the Dead. Good. So anytime you're asked to identify an axial plan, you're going to see one main long thoroughfare or road or a place where you could fold a city or a building in half with a symmetrical center axis. Okay.
Do axial plans have to line up north, south, east, or could they be in any orientation?
They can be in any orientation. Generally, if it's a lot of axial plans will follow the movement of the sun as it rises and sets. That's the most common way that they appear, but not always. And certainly not in modern buildings. They change quite a bit for modern city plans. So running along this axial route through the city, we have 3 major architectural sites. The Pyramid of the Moon, which is in the upper region of the plan here. The Pyramid of the Sun, north central, a little bit northeast. And then the Citadel and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Each of these sites was built sequentially. The Pyramid of the Sun was built first, the Pyramid of the Moon was second, and the temple and the citadel were built last. Again, it's important to realize that the names that we have are names that were given by the Mexica people, the Aztec people, and not the very first unknown people who we know nothing about and we don't know anything about what they called it. What we do know is that when the Mexica people arrived on this site, they were floored. They appeared, these pyramids appeared on the horizon as the Mexica were migrating. Some of them migrated up from Central America, some of them coming from the northwest downward to Mexico's Central Valley. And they just marveled at these crazy man-made mountains, really, is what it appeared like to them. It's how it got the name as the Valley of the Gods, or the site of the gods, because it just seemed just like the Egyptian pyramids, people looked at them and thought, well, other humans couldn't have made this. It must have been gods who did it. So we'll focus on the Pyramid of the Sun for a second. What do you remember from what you listened to, read, watched about the Pyramid of the Sun? Lucas, yeah.
It was the tallest structure in Central America at the time. It was like 200, I forget if it was feet or meters, but it was 200 of one of them.
Yeah,
tall.
250 meters tall. Yeah. So, you know, if a meter is roughly equal to a yard, 2.5 football fields tall. Good. What else? Anybody else? Gabby? Yeah.
It was built over a cave.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Anything else? Okay, we'll get into it in a little more detail. First, it's important to note that the structure you're looking at is a 20th century reconstruction. Around the early turn of the 20th century, Mexico's then dictator became interested in the history of the nation and sent a group of archaeologists out to what were then really like grass and tree covered mounds, large hills, to see what was under there. There had been some statues sighted in the area. Some preliminary archaeology had indicated that something important was here. So they came out, they uncovered these mounds, and part of what they saw was this stair-stepped pyramidal structure, and part of it was just kind of a mess of collapsed stone at the bottom. So doing their best with the tools they had at the time, they reconstructed the pyramids to look as they do today. So as mentioned, this was the largest pyramid in the Americas. It's the third largest of its kind in the world still to date. There's a larger one in Cholula in Puebla, and the Pyramid of Giza that you looked at yesterday is taller as well. So each side is 215 meters long. It is fantastically similar to the lengths of some of the pyramids that you looked at in Egypt. And while some people will speculate and say, we knew it, the Egyptians came to the Americas, and that's how they got these pyramids, it is more likely that there were some common astrological and scientific understandings that both groups of people were paying attention to, and they built these pyramids out of that knowledge. Not that it was shared knowledge, but just things that they had learned individually about the world, about the sun, and that's reflected in these buildings. Historians believe that the Pyramid of the Sun, different from the early story that we heard, and different from the story that's often told, that this Pyramid of the Sun was dedicated to a goddess, and this goddess was one of the most prominent deities of the city. It's an interesting fact, as most of the historical or the ancient sites that we'll look at are in fact dedicated to gods and not goddesses. This one stands out for that reason. So the east-west orientation of the sun complex, it's not exactly 90 degrees north-south. As we saw from that axial plan, if you look at the siting of this ceremonial city, it's shifted just a little bit, about 30 minutes north of direct west. And again, there are astrological reasons for that slightly off-tilt siting. The original pyramid consisted of 4 platforms, and they were surmounted, as you can see, by a main staircase. Only the elite could climb this staircase, and we'll see this again and again. Most of the time, those staircases are ceremonial. Originally, there was a small temple built on top of the Pyramid of the Sun, and the priestly class, and often the monarchs or the leaders in each of the sites, would be the only ones allowed to mount that staircase. Everyone else would be down in a main plaza watching these ceremonial rituals take place. It's thought that the building of Teotihuacan was a way of gathering people together, just as if we put together a huge works project today to reconstruct highways or to build new dams or to do a some sort of high-speed rail. It would draw people together from different regions. Teotihuacan was thought to do that. And you see that in the artifacts that are on the site. There are a mix of different peoples represented in some of the earthenware, some of the artwork, some of the different archaeological evidence that is still at Teotihuacan. What's going on in these images and glyphs that you're seeing here on the left? Just what do you see when you look at it without reading?
It looks like a cave underneath the pyramid.
Yeah, we've got a cave under these two primary pyramids, right? And the pyramids are drawn as if they are elevations, just real simple elevations, looking at the two pyramids from ground level straight at them. And then underneath we have this more curvilinear and layered image with almost a small face at the bottom. And we'll learn from the glyphs, particularly the Mayan glyphs, that there is a lot of figuration involved in their writing systems. What we learned from this, as you have already mentioned, is that there was a cave and a water source underneath these two primary pyramids. We'll get into what that water source may have been and how it was geologically formed as we move into the next section. But the water, of course, would have provided a fresh water source for the people living in the city, which is essential to the founding of any city. Another thing we see that is really unique to Teotihuacan over any of the pyramids in Egypt or many of the other sites with pyramids throughout the Americas is this drainage system. So what can you tell me just by looking at this image on the left? Just kind of simply put, what do you see when you look at it? How about Faikon?
Well, it has two layers, and I don't know what is the bottom one is for, but it's like the upper part is like like it has some stage. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's all I can tell from it.
Yeah, great. So we see an upper and a lower level, and we see a replication in the statues, right? Down here we have the famous Quetzalcoatl, who is the serpent god of this region and of a group, actually several different groups of practitioners throughout the Americas. And up here we have that same Quetzalcoatl figure. It's been worn with time and exposure in a way that this one that was below ground has been well preserved. This cutaway here, this was cut out. This is cement that was added much later for the sake of tourists, but it's then been cut back out in order to examine this drainage system that ran underneath the Avenue of the Dead. If you imagine like a large plumbing system that runs right under the Avenue of the Dead, and then the water from there empties out into a nearby river. It is one of the earliest systems of drainage and water purification and reuse and a detoxing of the city by flushing out the waste materials that you see in the Americas. It's pretty spectacular. And the other thing you can see from this image is the way that the city built up over time. Each of the pyramids that you look at had a small pyramid inside in the beginning that was dedicated to one particular leader at the time. Then the next one would build up over the top. The pyramid would get bigger, the next one over the top, until we get to these enormous pyramids that we see today. And you can see that building up here in that water level, or in that drainage system, and then the street level. And it would continue up if we continued to dig away at the layers that are existing. Okay. Here you're seeing it again just from a frontal view to reemphasize that duplication. Okay, now we'll move on to the period of the moon. The Pyramid of the Moon is flanked by a series of complex rooms and palaces. We'll get into that as well. But the area around it could hold over 100,000 people. So it was really a dedicated ceremonial space. Here you're looking at the Pyramid of the Moon from the top of the Pyramid of the Sun. They are not close together. In order for one to be part of a procession that moved from the Pyramid of the Sun then to the Pyramid of the Moon, for example, it's quite a walk. It's about a quarter of a mile, if not half, between the two. So you can see the scale on which this religious center was built. They weren't building for the short term. They were building for a monumental complex made for a mass of people. What else do you notice about the Pyramid of the Moon, looking at it from this view? Ellen?
I remember I think it was the podcast, they mentioned how when you're walking towards it, there's this like grand mountain behind it. But as you get closer and closer, the pyramid becomes the mountain.
Yeah, excellent. So as we saw in Egypt, again in Mesoamerica, there's this human desire to replicate nature, right? To create something as spectacular as the mountains around, and in this case, to do it in honor to the gods and goddesses of their practices. The other thing that you notice when you look at the Pyramid of the Moon, different from the Pyramid of the Sun, are all these smaller pyramids that surround the plaza. These would have been for different forms or the worship of different lesser gods and goddesses. Inside each of these pyramids, they're just beginning in-depth archaeological investigations, because it had been thought for a long time that these were solid masses until some drone work and some LiDAR revealed more inside these pyramids than was thought before. So inside we're now finding burial spaces, we're finding people and groups buried with some precious objects as well. But each of these would have been probably a part of a calendar of worship. And again, you can see this huge main plaza where the practitioners and people of the region would have stood. Okay, so you get the idea. We'll move on to the citadel and the temple of the feathered serpent, which is now in the lower region of the complex. Here we can dig in just a little bit to another pair of architectural terms. So what we're seeing here in these smaller pyramids is the tablero talud archetype, basically. So the tablero, as you can see from this, is the flat-sided front of these pyramids. Here in the drawing, it looks like the tablero is very small. In this pyramid, and there are others where it's different, in this pyramid, the tablero is actually this longer, extended flat region. And the talud is this sloped bit. So it's really just the way that this cake is layered. You have flat vertical sides, and then you have slopes, and then flat, and then slopes. That's the tablero talud pairing. Any questions on that? You'll see it across the world in a lot of different architecture, but it certainly shows up again and again throughout the Americas. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent is one of the best preserved parts at Teotihuacan. Here we can see what each of the larger pyramids would have originally looked like. We can see their ornamentation, the decoration. We see these two figures here. One is that plumed serpent, the famed god Quetzalcoatl, or Kukulkan is another name for him. And then to the left, we have a headdress. This would have been something that would have sat on top, possibly of one of the priests who were leading worship or practice in the area. These would have originally been covered in mosaics. They would have been wildly colorful. And we can see how that would look from this recreation, which is inside the National Anthropology Museum in Mexico City. Again, if you go to Mexico City, don't miss this museum. It is one of the best in the world. It's fantastic. You can run through it quickly, or you can take 3 days if you want. But what do you notice when you look at this recreation? What stands out here that we definitely didn't see on the pyramids?
They're gold of some sort.
Yeah, there's gold. What else?
I guess just like the colors in general, like
Yeah.
everything looked kind of worn down, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we were seeing in those images before is actually the underlayer of the pyramids. These top structures were looted over time. They were worn down over time. This is hundreds and hundreds of years where these things just eventually fell apart or were taken by different passersby or different attacking groups. Some of it is still preserved in the museum, but much of it is gone. In that citadel and in the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, that's where we see the most robust recreation. So once archaeologists saw this, they went back to those pyramids of the sun and the moon and began to investigate the stones that had fallen around them and got a clearer picture, which led them to know and understand that actually the Temple of the Sun was originally a brilliant red color. The whole thing was this deep red that you're seeing in the image here. And there was a lot of ornamentation, a lot of mosaics, just as we're seeing now. If you go to the site to visit it, you don't get that image. You get something that is far more archaic looking or simpler, and it's important to remember that those stones that are sticking out were the underlayer on which this decorative layer hung. Okay, I love this site, so we could do this all day. I'm gonna move forward to save you guys some pain. It's also important to remember that this stonework, which you see all over the place, is also not accurate. When they did their 20th century reconstruction, without the tools that we have today, they didn't know exactly how the stonework worked. You'll see this everywhere, but it's a mix of concrete and rock. And it's just their, we could say, best attempt or sloppy attempt at the time to try and figure out what was going on. Okay. Last thing at Teotihuacan are these palaces. This is a standout feature of the site. There are no other known Mesoamerican pyramids where the palaces are still extant, if they did ever exist. You can go down in them when you visit Teotihuacan. And what you see here, well, tell me what you see here. What are we looking at in this image? Rosie. Oh, sorry, your volume is off. Can you
yeah, there, is that better?
Yeah.
I see a central patio in the middle, and then there seems to be smaller plazas, I guess, around it. So yeah, I guess it just emphasizes the centrality of the community here. Or
yeah, exactly. This principal patio, or it's really just the main communal space. It would have been an open porch. And then what we're seeing here are solid walls. These would have been rooms of the palace. They'd be covered with a thatched roof, and they would have been different places for it wouldn't have been the king and the queen, but those two figureheads in their respective names would have lived in these rooms. Their family would have lived in these rooms. Servants of the people would have lived in these rooms. What we see from the architectural plan is the layout of these many, many, many small rooms all conjoined together. And then we see in these small dots, and you'll learn to identify these as we go, these would have been columns or pillars that again point to what sort of roof structure would have been there. This is a recreation of the palace rooms. These are partially existent murals that would have been there. They would have been more elaborate. They would have been full scale up the wall, but this is what remains, and it gives you an idea of how these palace rooms would have looked with their thick beams and posts and that very rich ceiling. This is that principal plaza that we saw in the plan, this open communal space. People would have gathered there for lots of different reasons, just as we all do in an outdoor space. Those murals that would have been inside the palaces, we have this image of some of the originals replicated at the Museum of Anthropology. And then we have this full replication. So I'm gonna put you in breakout rooms for no, I'm not, because you can't see the images, can you? Has that been the case when you break out, you don't see the images? Okay, all right, stay here. Take a minute to yourself. and think about what's going on here. What are the features that you notice in this mural? Okay, what are some of the identifying features, or what stands out when you look at it? Let's start with Brad.
When I kind of looked at it, it looks like there's some sort of tree in the background, and the person in the middle is like, I don't know, probably something to do with rain, because it kind of looks like he's got like raindrops coming out of his hands, and the people next to him kind of look like they're watering plants or something. I don't know. That's what I thought.
Yeah, good. So we have some kind of organic, possibly tree structure. We've got some water in there, and we've got a series of figures. Good. What else?
It seems that the headdresses that the people are wearing on each side match roughly the head of the central figure, like a profile view.
Yeah, nice. There's a replication of that headdress. Yeah, good. What else, Rosie? You have your hand up?
Yeah, and I also noticed it's very symmetrical and organized, so it kind of reminds me of almost a city plan there too, how everything is pretty precise and organized in that manner.
Very nice. Good. So we have a focus on symmetry that we're seeing in the plan and in the mural. We have that feathered serpent headdress replicated on the central figure, as well as the attendant figures on the sides. So what this is a depiction of that primary goddess of the Pyramid of the Sun. And again, she has her Quetzalcoatl headdress, as do her attendants. And that image, that tree, or that very organic structure coming up from behind her, or almost up from her headdress, is a representation, as we see over and over in art history, of fertility, right? We have this blooming plant with vibrant flowers. There's some birds, some insects, some things. It's very alive. It's very fertile. So it's representing the region itself. Which was in fact the case. It was a great place for farming, a great place for planting, which is one of the reasons it became the site that it was. Okay, what's going on with her hands? What's coming out of her hands? Yeah, Gabby, I think you mouthed water. Yeah. So there are two readings of this. It can either be water or jade. And the water reading is supported by this understructure down here on the bottom. Has been written about as if they were waves. So it points to that drainage system that we discussed. It points to the fluvial rivers that were nearby. We're really just getting a picture of this lush and fertile land under this, the rule of this goddess. The other thing about those that depiction coming from her hands, it's been shown in two different ways. This is another mural of the same goddess figure. And here, instead of water coming up from her hands, we have what is a traditional depiction of jade. And the reason this is important is it's a clue to the economic exchange going on in Teotihuacan. Jade, as well as turquoise, were some of the primary jewel commodities that were being traded in and out of Teotihuacan. And some of the stones that were found at Teotihuacan are the turquoise stones that you see in this diagram here. This diagram shows us the only place where these particular types of turquoise come from, pinpointed to California and Arizona and Colorado. Finding those in Teotihuacan points to a robust trade structure where perhaps the Nahuatl were trading jade for turquoise with people who are traveling back across robust trade routes. All sorts of fun things you can find in architectural and archaeological digs. Okay, questions about Teotihuacan? Okay, do you guys need to stretch? Take a minute. This is a long lecture, this one. We're gonna do Tikal, and then we have one other site. The next two are faster than the first one, but if you need to move around, feel free to do that. All right, so Tikal is located in what we know of as Guatemala today. And this site was built up between 200 and 600 CE, or more commonly maybe called AD. Okay, let's see if this is gonna work. Can you guys hear the volume on that? Okay. It gets real dramatic, but it is a dramatic event. This is it's gonna play again for a second. This is a reenactment of an asteroid hitting the Yucatan Peninsula. And this is the asteroid, when we talk about theories of how the dinosaurs went extinct, this is the asteroid that is thought to have changed everything geologically and atmospherically. That impact, as you saw, was huge. The heat from the impact changed the land itself. In fact, you can see here in this red circle just exactly where it made contact with the Yucatan. When that happened, the heat from that impact was so great that the land around almost boiled. It became so hot that pockets of air and water rushed into areas that were formerly solid land. You can see those pockets in all of these tiny little turquoise dots. This is the outline of the crater of the asteroid's impact. And you can see here what we're about to look at in detail, which are the cenotes, or sinkholes. And this is the result of that earth bubbling up and then filling with fresh water. Some of them resealed on the top. Has anyone ever been to a cenote? Have you looked at this before? Okay, again, go to Mexico City. Go outside of Mexico City and visit a cenote. As you can see, we've got little tourists over here in this image who are swimming in here. They are freshwater pockets that were captured inside the land when it bubbled up from that asteroid. So they are full of flora and fauna that wouldn't otherwise be there, and they provided a fresh water source for all of the Mayan civilizations that we're about to look at. They are key to the survival and thriving of all those people. You can see the way that on that Yucatan Peninsula, almost following the way that asteroid hit, we have a series of Mayan city-states that have built up. This is a revision of what was once a sketch or a drawing by Frederick Catherwood, who is sort of one of the earliest Europeans to come to the Americas and do drawings of what he found there. Now, those drawings can be fanciful and racist, and we are not going to use Catherwood as a guide, but he is one of the earliest people to sort of show what was happening there. So here we are in Tikal. I'm going to do a little flyover image so you can see the site. Okay, so the video clearly comes to you from someone's travel blog. What I like about it is there in the end, when you see the guy with his backpack, you get a sense of the human scale inside this really incredible site. So here we are looking at a site plan of Tikal. Comparing this to the site plan of Teotihuacan, what's different, what's similar, what stands out?
It seems more disorganized.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about why it seems more disorganized.
Just less grid-like, almost random.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
exactly.
probably not random, but it just seems random from an aerial view. There might be like mountains or something that's determining where they built their structures.
No, there aren't. You're right on in that it seems random. What happened with Mayan city-states is that each of the wealthier families would decide to build a temple to their chosen deity. And they would just build it right next to their house, and that would become a large temple complex. And if I wanted to build one here in group F, and you lived over here in group G, you just build it where you are. So it is far less structured as a city-state than Teotihuacan, which had its nice axial plan and organized grid. And we see this throughout the Mayan city-states. It was just a way of building where there's a little more individualism in the way that the city is laid out. Not necessarily in the practices of the people, but just in the construction element. This is actually an axonometric view, which means a little bit between a section and a plan. You're seeing something kind of on a tilt. You're not going to need to know anything about axonometric images, but that's what this is. And here we're seeing a series of different pyramidal structures. This is an overview of the primary area of the site. And I love this because it shows you just the density of this sort of jungle forest land around Tikal itself. Tikal was buried under these trees and roots and bushes and plants for several centuries after, in fact, maybe 10 centuries after it was, after people left and vacated the area. And it took a priest who was going out into the wilderness to convert the so-called heathens to then be chased away by those same peoples who he later then claimed were cannibals. As he was being chased through the forest, he came upon this area with these huge protruding mountains, what he thought were mountains. And after he calmed down from the fear and shock of his adventure, he told other people about this. They went back out into that jungled area and began to strip away the trees and mess and natural growth and found these pyramids underneath. So just looking at one or two, what's different about these from the pyramids at Teotihuacan? Let's see, Ellen?
Well, compared to the other ones, there's no like platforms really. It doesn't look like there's any platforms or like ceremonies like they did on the Pyramid of the Sun. And it's also very steep.
Great. I get it what you're saying. Let me go back one or two. There are these tiny little platforms. Well, what happened here? there are these tiny little platforms or stair steps, but you're totally right that at the very top, we don't have that open space. What we do have are the small temples that were built there as shrines to the gods, which would have originally been on the top of Teotihuacan also. We just don't have any remainders or evidence of them. But they are much steeper, as you pointed out. Here we can see one in plan on the bottom and in elevation here, and they just are a much sharper angle and peak. One of the things that Tikal is known for are the remainders of Mayan hieroglyphs, particularly evidence of the Mayan Codex. As you're seeing here on the left, these are some writings or depictions that were left over when the Spanish came to the Americas. They saw all of this as blasphemous writing, as not Christian, as not godly, and they burned all of the texts. They destroyed all of the writing that they saw, thinking that it was unacceptable, which is a huge loss, of course, for history. But there are still some remainders at Tikal, which is why this site stands out. The hieroglyphs, or the glyphs themselves, I guess is what we would more accurately call them, are highly pictorial, as you can see here in the images. In addition to those highly pictorial glyphs, the Mayans also developed a very sophisticated number system. It's a base 20 number system, where we use a base 10, they use base 20. And they were one of the earliest to identify the 0. Here is a more robust codex where you can see a combination of glyphs and then larger drawings of figures and gods, ceremonial people in practice. Okay. Using Mayan glyphs, there are multiple ways to write the same word. It's a highly sophisticated and nuanced language. So for example, what we're seeing here are 3 different ways to write jaguar. And the jaguar was one of the principal gods, one of the principal figures for the Mayans. What do you see when you look at these? Just what are some of the identifiable markers in these images? Sophie.
So in the 2 on the right, you can see like the feet, and then also on all of them, the tooth that is sticking out on the side and the ears and the dots look very identifiable as to what a jaguar would look like.
Yeah, exactly. It's a beautiful pictorial image. And the artisans who would make these glyphs, they even had their own signature on the glyphs where they were taking pride in having made this thing with care and beauty. But as you pointed out, these are 3 different ways to show that jaguar figure. This is often thought to be a large paw and then the hind feet, but it's identifiable to us in some manner. One of the standout figures in the Mayan glyphs, shows up here, which is interpreted as the astronomer, who would have been a really key scientific figure for the Maya. You see him here in blue. Okay, Tikal again is, as I mentioned, is most famous for its preservation of glyphs and stela. A stela is really this sort of large, very large knife-like form. This is going to be about 5 to 7 feet tall, generally. And they are carved in bas-relief. And while it's difficult to see on the stela itself, I've put these images over here so you can see what's happening on the front, the back, and the sides of this stela. What stands out when you look at those depictions of what's on there? How would you describe this kind of art? Christina, any ideas?
They're very linear representations of whatever the figures are, and they're almost collage-like with all the little pieces that are coming together to form these larger images.
Great description. Collage-like is a great way to say it. The thing that we see in Mayan art, it's not a calm, cool, soft-lined portrayal. As you said, there's a lot going on. They're almost erratic, energetic images. There's so much detail. There's so much going on in every aspect of what is carved or drawn there. This particular stela is so important because it really tells us the most history that we've been able to gather about the site of Tikal itself. It shows us the primary figures of succession. This is the son taking over from the father, and then on the back we have like a story of this son who's taking over, and it would say something like Bird Jaguar, which is what this guy is known as. Bird Jaguar is taking over for Bird Jaguar the Senior, who is known for his great exploits in X, Y, and Z. And from that sort of, heroic tale, historians have been able to gather some details about what happened to Tikal, who was there, how long they reigned. In this image, you can see the difference between this Mayan form of art and the Olmecs, who would have been a slightly older or more ancient group of people. Here in the Olmec sculptures, we have very realistic, very human-like depictions of muscles and of joints and the facial features. And then as we move into Mayan drawings, it's not that they're not realistic, but they are just so embellished that we're seeing almost an imaginary world or their spirit world over the top of the figures themselves. Okay. Oh, it's so frustrating that you can't see. Could you guys take a screen grab before I send you into some breakout groups? Okay, good, because I really want you to be able to talk about this. I'm going to move you into some breakout rooms for about 3 to 4 minutes. Tell me what you see going on. On that left side, you've got the actual carved bas-relief, and on the right side, you have the drawing of what's going on in the bas-relief. Just take your best stab at what you see. Okay, for those of you who are watching this as a recording later, take this time to look at the images that you see on your screen and write down a few things about what visuals are coming up for you, what stands out, what do you notice is happening, what's the action you think is taking place, and send that to me as an email. Okay, so let me go back to sharing the screen, and then tell me what you found. See, Meredith, would you like to speak for your group a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So something that first thing we said was something about it looks like they were putting beads into a basket. And then we were thinking that ignore my sister talking and my brother talking in the background. And then the columns on the sides next to the people were like the stories of the people, maybe. And then we also mentioned something, there were a lot of faces around. And then we couldn't tell if maybe the person on the right was like a baby or a smaller person or something.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, that's about it.
Nice, okay, great observations. Anybody else see anything, what stood out?
We were also talking about how the figure on the right could possibly be like the female figure in the photo with the like extended belly. And then also how they're wearing like super intricate headdresses and might be a symbol of their like royalty or their power. And either there's a transfer of power or a sharing of power that's going on between the two figures.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, anything super weird in the image?
The face on the back of the left figure.
Yeah. Okay, so this image gets crazy. Sorry for where this is going to go, but it does tell us a little bit about Mayan succession. So what you're seeing here is a bloodletting ritual. It is the most reverent form of self-sacrifice for Mayan rulers. And it requires that the men ascending to leadership cut themselves. What you're seeing is an image of a man holding his hands in front of his penis, so you don't see it, and you see what you think are beads coming down. It's actually a bloodletting process. It's horrifying. But it was supposed to symbolize the length to which the leader would go to dedicate himself to his people. It might be something we need to reinstitute now. I don't know. It seems a little brutal, but nonetheless, what we're seeing is this elaborate procession or elaborate ascension ritual. Here we have Bird Jaguar with his feathered serpent headdress. We see this again and again on the left. And this is actually the real and actual head of his father on his back, which is supposed to be there to guide him in his leadership. It's crazy what's happening. But Bird Jaguar was so proud of this ritual sacrifice. He had a series of these large stone templates basically put up in his palace and then distributed to palaces throughout his domain. The figure here on the right, you as you pointed out, a smaller figure. This is actually like the priest attending to Bird Jaguar as he moves into his monumental role and overseeing the process to make sure that the bloodletting did occur. So some craziness that we can learn about what happened at Tikal. Here we've got another set of bas-relief carvings. This is another sacrificial ritual. In this case, this is Bird Jaguar overseeing the ritual sacrifice of his wife. Here in the detail, you can see that this is a rope. The wife was required to cut through her tongue and string the rope through. It would be like a very large and grotesque piercing. And this sort of staff up above her would have been filled with a hallucinogenic incense. And the idea was during this process, due to the pain of the ritual itself, the gods would come to the woman and give her a vision of what her husband's reign would look like, or what would be the key features. So, as mentioned, Bird Jaguar was so proud of this ceremony for a few different reasons. One, it turns out that actually the bloodline for leadership or for this key position belonged to his wife, not to him. So he wanted to make a great show to the people that even though he was not the ordained ruler by blood, he was by sacrifice and through marriage. So it's almost a way of advertising or trying to convince his people that he is the rightful leader. And they do this through these replication of these very gruesome but very dedicated images. Here we see a few more. This one is actually the mother of Bird Jaguar, and this is highly unusual, the portrayal of women. So we just want to highlight that did occur both in the matriarch, who we saw in the bloodletting, and then actually the mother of Bird Jaguar as well. Okay, any questions on that? Okay. We'll wrap up with Chichen Itza. Another site in the Mayan Peninsula, in the Yucatan Peninsula. This is another Mayan ceremonial city center. And like we saw with Tikal, it is arranged again in a less gridded way, but also in a less idiosyncratic. It's somewhere in the middle of the two. I'm gonna do this quick flyover. Okay, so you can see what's happening. Again, we're sort of out in this foresty, jungled area. And again, we have this series of monumental structures popping up around a cenote, which we see here in this image. This is the Cenote Sagrado. And it is known as the sacrificial well for Chichen Itza. There was a dig or a drag through the cenote between 1904 and 1910 to find out if it was really human sacrifice that was occurring here. When they did this drag through the water, they found all sorts of prized possessions that had been thrown into the cenote, as well as human remains, which does give concrete evidence of that idea of human sacrifice. I do promise that not every episode of our class is going to be so gruesome, but that's where we are. So here we're looking at two different site plans. On the right, we have this Olmec site of San Lorenzo, which we don't look in this class. I do that in my Latin American class. But between the two, the San Lorenzo site is a little bit more like Teotihuacan. You can see an axis or a unified direction that city is built along, whereas Chichen Itza, again, has a little more sporadic and laid out. But the reason it is so spread apart here is that the gathering of the people was the most important part of Chichen Itza itself. They wanted to make plenty of room, lots of large plazas, so that people could gather around the main pyramid site, around the ball court, and the Temple of the Warriors, which are the three sites we'll wrap up with today. This gives you an idea sort of where things are and how they're laid out. This is the primary pyramid. The Temple of the Warriors is over here, and the ball court falls over here. There's also an observatory, going back to our little astronomer in those Mayan glyphs. This is one of the most well-preserved observatories of the Mayan city-states. You can see here where they would have used this as a way of registering the movement of the sun and of the moon. And the site itself, you can see how it's built. Again, these are not perfectly aligned, and they're again done for astronomical observation purposes. The primary temple of Kukulkan, which is again also known as Quetzalcoatl, that feathered serpent god, is in the center. This building, more than a building, is really a solar calendar. There are 91 steps on 3 sides and 92 steps on the northern side, so that the whole thing registers 365 steps, one for each day of the solar calendar. Each side of the terraces are divided by these staircases, which creates a total of 18 sections moving around the pyramid itself, which is equal to the months in the Mayan calendar. Inside Kukulkan, we see again these layered pyramids as were existent in Tikal and in Chichen Itza as well, where an earlier ruler had their small pyramid, someone else built a bigger, grander one over the outside, and so on. One of the key statuaries to come out of Chichen Itza is the figure of Chacmul. And Chacmul is the god of human sacrifice. He's laying, you can see him laying flat on his back. There would often be a bowl that would be set on his stomach in that flattened area in the middle. And after battle, often warriors were brought back to the Temple of the Warrior, and this would be an opposing warrior. Unique in warfare, the Mayans didn't kill their enemy on the battlefield. They would battle on the battlefield, and then they would bring them back to a temple or a dedicated site for human sacrifice of that figure to the gods. It wasn't just a brutal, I'm killing you, it was I'm killing you, and then I'm giving you over to their higher form of power. It's still brutal, but you see what I mean. This is the Temple of the Warriors. Each of these columns would have been carved in remembrance to a very particular warrior. It would have been dedicated to that person and their lineage. Above the top of this huge colonnade would have been a thatched roof or porch structure. And at the very top up here, you can see him just so tiny, but a little bit enlarged down here is the figure of Chocmole. This gives you a better idea of what was happening in those colonnades. Again, all the carving has been worn down, eroded, or stolen over time. But this colonnade would have taken you to this bathhouse, which would have been a ceremonial bath or cleansing site. And then we have the ball court. If I can just beg your patience a few more minutes, I'm going to show you this video about this a really important game. It's we could think of it as a precursor to football, soccer, any of the sports that we know of. Here the stakes were far higher than they are in modern sports, but just take a second to see what's going on.
For the Maya, the sky was not the only otherworldly domain, and the gods of the sky were not the only ones that had to be appeased. Beneath the earth, there lay another vast realm, a supernatural underworld where the spirits of the dead roamed.
For the Mayas, the structure of the world. We are living in the living plane that it's the earth, and then there's the skies with different levels, and of course the underworld. The underworld was the place where the people that are not living anymore are there. So for them, when you die, it's not the end of everything.
In the Popol Vuh, an ancient Mayan narrative, the underworld is called Xibalba, the place of fear. It has 9 perilous levels, ruled by 12 lords, gods of death, who are responsible for disease and affliction. The Maya believe this place of death exists side by side with the land of the living. The underworld could be reached in the most unlikely of places. This huge open court in Chichen Itza looks almost like a marketplace, but no buying or selling went on here. It was the setting for an ancient Mayan ball game, a game far deadlier than any modern sport. Measuring 550 by 230 feet, the court is over twice the size of a modern American football field. Here, 2 teams faced off, with players aiming to hit the ball through hoops high on the walls. They play for the highest possible stakes, because the losing team faces being sacrificed to the gods. The winners kill the losers and cut off their heads. Wall reliefs show the victors holding a loser's severed head. At first glance, the high walls that surround the ball court don't seem to have much purpose. The reason for their existence could lie in the game's religious meaning. An ancient myth from the Popol Vuh explains its origins. In this story, heroic twins play the game with the lords of the underworld. The lords dismember them and burn their remains. The twins are reborn. Emerging from the underworld, they become the sun and the moon.
They die and they revive again every day to remind humans that they got to keep the balance, maybe by making offerings and rituals specific to the underworld.
Okay, so just a little bit different form of sport, but you can see the cosmology that's being set up for us to understand about the Mayans. If we thought that the sun wouldn't come up tomorrow unless, you ate 35 watermelons, we would be about the business of eating 35 watermelons every day to make sure that the sun would come up every single day. Same thing with the moon, same thing with the rain. And that is the worldview that the Mayans have. That's why these ritual sacrifices happen. It's why human sacrifice happens. It's not that they were particularly cruel people. It's just the way they understood the world is that sacrifice, as I think Lucas mentioned early on, baby Jack, was that sacrifice was required, or the sun wouldn't come up tomorrow, the world would stop. So you see the urgency in this. It's not as much for pleasure as is sometimes depicted in these peoples. That was a lot today. Questions, comments? Thank you for hanging in. Let's talk for 5 minutes about your weekend project. So you've got a project this weekend. It's your very first formal analysis. If you go in the modules, you'll see the directions for the assignment. You're gonna pick a building in your neighborhood. You're going to look at one facade, draw the elevation of that facade for yourself. Don't show it to your colleagues on Monday, but draw it for yourself, and then sit in front of that building. Please do your best not to take a photo and then walk away and look at the photo. Stand there, sit across the street. If it's your house, sit in the front yard, do whatever you need to do. Look at it very carefully and describe to me everything that you see. You'll see from the examples, this includes when you talk about the color of a building. Let's say you're looking at a brick building. Rather than just saying it's a red brick, tell me it's red like leaves in late fall. Do something more to give me an idea which color red you're talking about, which kind of orange. Is it rough? Is it smooth? Is it rough like sandpaper, or is it rough like a cobblestone street? Just give as much detail as you can. This will benefit your reader as well as the people who are trying to draw it for you on Monday. So you'll do this about 2-page write-up on the building of your choice, and then on Monday we'll get together and do that exercise. Any questions on that? Okay, good. You'll need to upload your drawing and your write-up. I can't remember if that's due after Monday, after we all get together, but if you'll just look at the deadline, it's there in Canvas. And I'll look forward to reading those and giving you feedback so that you'll be ready for the next graded assignments of that kind. Okay, thanks for your patience. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.